Hi everyone and welcome to another Marvelous video. Originating in the American media, Marvel and DC Comics mostly had American superheroes, but it also extends to Canada, which is known to be similar to the US in its culture, geography, and values. Both comic franchises have a good number of Canadian characters, and most of them showcase minute similar nuances in personality, which make them fan favorites. As the title of today's video suggests, we will be categorizing some of the most powerful Canadian superheroes from Marvel and DC Comics. So without any further delay, let us begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Wolverine. First on the list, we have the Canadian superhero who is now a global fan favorite. It is none other than James Howlett, aka Logan, aka the Wolverine. His life began in the wealthy estate of the Howletts in Cold Lake, Alberta, Canada, as the child of John and Elizabeth Howlett. However, in reality, he was the result of an illegitimate affair between Elizabeth and Howlett's groundskeeper, Thomas Logan, who lived within the Howlett's property with his son, Doug. After the death of her first son, Elizabeth was never able to cope with her trauma, for which the Howletts hired a red-headed Irish girl, Rose O'Hara, to accompany young James. Rose, James, and Doug grew up as friends, but the recurring abuse of Thomas towards his son Doug compelled the child to grow toxic. Later, when he made unwanted advances to Rose, and James reported the incident to his father, Doug killed his beloved puppy Callie in retaliation. Following the incident, John Howlett discarded Doug and his father from the estate, and that was when things got worse. Thomas, in a drunken state, later arrived at the Howletts' mansion with a shotgun in hopes of escaping with Elizabeth and ended up killing John before young James. The trauma, pain, and anger triggered James's mutation, and the 3 bone claws emerged from his hands. He killed Thomas and left 3 claw marks on Doug's face. Elizabeth asked Rose and James to leave and immediately committed suicide. Later, when the police arrived, Doug stated that it was Rose who was behind the killings and had escaped with James. Young James and Rose wandered from place to place in Canada and finally took refuge in a British Columbia stone quarry. Rose declared themselves as cousins and James's name to be Logan. The two worked as miners, and owing to his powerful mining skills, the locals gave Logan the name Wolverine. With growing age, Logan became more and more powerful, and his strong healing factor removed his childhood trauma from his mind. However, pain and suffering had always been a constant for him. When Logan began growing closer to Rose and eventually fell in love, Rose and his mentor Smitty became engaged. Just when Logan accepted his fate, Doug entered his life again. He attacked Logan, and as the latter was about to kill Doug, Rose came in between and got impaled by his claws. The death of Rose in his hands caused Logan to abandon the civilized world and live with the wolves. He later worked in Canada and the world as a spy and mercenary until joining the Weapon X program in 1961, through which his endoskeleton was coated with adamantium. Wolverine was a part of several important events in the Marvel Universe. James Hudson, aka Guardian. Introduced in 1977's X-Men issue 109, James Hudson, aka The Guardian, was yet another Marvel superhero from Canada. He was born in London, Ontario, Canada, and raised by Frederick Hudson II. He was the youngest of 3 children, who were each born to different mothers. As an adult, James worked for the Can Oil Corporation, where he came up with his greatest invention. It was a highly sophisticated exoskeleton suit that could endure the harsh conditions of oil deposits and thereby help the exploration. Eventually, it was revealed that the United States military had plans for weaponizing the suit, following which James left Can with the suit's helmets and destroyed its plans and documents. He was accompanied by a young secretary named Heather McNeil. The two contacted the Canadian government to avoid prosecution, following which Ottawa retroactively declared Hudson as a government employee. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau later made him one of the founding members of the Ministry of Defence's Secret Research and Development Program known as Department H. Later, at some point, James and Heather encountered a feral Wolverine and managed to calm him. Wolverine remained with them for a significant amount of time until James came up with the idea of forming a Canadian superhero team. It all happened after the Fantastic Four began gaining the limelight. Although Wolverine declined his offer, Hudson managed to form his team called the Alpha Fight. Meanwhile, AM Can Oil Corporation became bankrupt, leaving the Canadian government to take possession of it. With the suits in possession, James took the name Weapon Alpha and began working as a Canadian hero. He was tasked to capture Wolverine and bring him back to Weapon H, a mission that he failed and ended up accidentally wounding Moira McTaggart. The incident left a deep scar on James, and he later took the name Vindicator to redeem himself. Later, when Department H was closed, James shifted to New York and began working for Roxxon Oil and stayed in an apartment at 569 Lehman Place, Brooklyn Heights. However, this was all a trap set up by one of Hudson's old enemies, Jackson. The two fought, and in the end, not only was Jackson defeated, but the Guardian suit exploded, apparently killing him. However, it was revealed that James was stuck into a spiral raft and later found by the members of the Quillen race. They assumed the destroyed suit to be a part of James's body, and they ended up bonding James to his suit, thereby making him a cyborg. Since Galactus had been previously stopped by the Earthlings, the Quillens believed James to be a useful backup against Galactus. Galactus was faced by Alpha Fight and the Avengers in another dimension, and in the end, James nearly sacrificed himself to help the rest return to their own dimension. James made numerous appearances in the comics, and certainly is one of the prominent characters of the Marvel Universe.
Let's count them down.
Deadpool. We all know that our favorite merc with the mouth was, in fact, a citizen of Canada. There have been conflicting claims made by Wade, aka Deadpool, about his childhood, with evidence. But he was surely from Canada. Wade's memories of his childhood were cloudy. He once stated that his father had abandoned him in his childhood, and that his mother kept abusing him till he became an adult and beat her instead. In another instance, Wade stated his mother to have died when he was 5, and since then, his father, who was an army officer, raised him. His father's repeated abuse turned him into a criminal, and later, one of his friends shot and killed his dad. Wade also claimed his father had left them, and when his mother became addicted to alcohol, he escaped from her so that he could spend all her money on himself. Much to the contradiction, it was found out that Wade's parents lived together in Canada, of which Wade had no memory. Whatever may be the reason, Wade was a highly skillful mercenary, and when he left home, he joined the US Army Special Forces. However, he was discarded owing to his conflicting moral code and his tendency not to follow orders. Wade later joined a group of CIA-sponsored mercenaries where he had a romantic connection with a woman named Francie. Wade later left the group and traveled to Japan, where he was hired by a Japanese crime lord called the Boss. He was tasked to infiltrate a sumo wrestling ring owned by a rival criminal, the Oyakata. Wade entered the group and remained there for 3 years. During this period, he engaged in a romantic relationship with his mentor's daughter, Cesar. Finally, when it was time to murder Oyakata, Wade refused and left for the USA. Wade next was hired by Middle Eastern interests to kill Althea, a blind British government operative also going by the name Bling AI. Wade then had also fallen in love with a teenage mutant prostitute, Vanessa Carlyle, and later, when he failed to assassinate Blind AI, his contractors sought to take their revenge on him. Soon, Vanessa became one of the prime targets. Vanessa was rescued by Zoe Culloden, but when Wade learnt about his 34 inoperable cancerous tumors, he broke up and left to live the rest of his life alone. He even avoided treatment to not prolong things until Canada's Department K offered him hope. Department K was one of the offshoots of the Weapons Plus program, and they started treating him by injecting Wolverine's healing factor inside his body. The treatment showed promise, and Wade was soon back on his feet. However, when he killed one of his teammates Slayback, his healing factor began destabilizing. Wade was rejected from Weapon X and sent to the hospice, where all the failed superhuman operatives were treated. However, the hospice eventually became a place of brutal experiments and torture conducted by Dr. Kilbrew and his sadistic assistant Ajax. They tortured Deadpool in various ways, but he survived, and during this period, Deadpool formed a romantic connection with the cosmic entity known as Death. The other patients of the hospice began placing bets on how long Deadpool would survive, while Wade eagerly awaited to die and unite with Death. When he constantly taunted Ajax, Ajax lobotomized his closest pal, Worm. Deadpool had to kill Worm to end his suffering, which again, according to the rules of hospice, meant his execution. Ajax ripped Wade's heart out, but his undying thirst for revenge kicked back his healing factor and regenerated his heart. Wade shot Ajax with 2 automatic rifles and left hospice with the remaining patients. Deadpool's adventures are spread throughout different comics and storylines presented by Marvel. David Isherwood, Prime Earth. Next, we have a Canadian character from the DC universe, created by Christopher Priest, Carlo Pogolayan, and Jason Paz. David Isherwood was a member of the Canadian Special Ops based in Ottawa, Canada. David was notably one of the greatest allies of Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke. David met Slade soon after he became a mercenary and saved his life, and that of his son Joseph during a UN peacekeeper mission. He soon became Slade's weapons designer, and Slade's old Prometheum suit was one of his creations. David also developed the Icon suit, which were durable enough to withstand blows from even Superman. Despite his loyalty towards Slade, their relationship became sour when Slade learned about David's long relationship with his son Joseph. He considered this a form of betrayal and attacked David. David was severely wounded and seemingly dead. Interestingly, prior to his death, Dr. Villain had infected David with Slade's blood in an attempt to create a new super serum. Back then, it did not work, but his death activated the serum, and he was reincarnated into a wild monster. Swearing revenge on Slade, David wore Slade's old costume and began hunting him. However, it was later revealed that Slade had in fact not killed David. After being beaten severely, David survived, and it was Jericho who pushed him off the building. Soon David once again became Slade's ally and helped him when he was going mentally crazy. Later, Slade began facing 2 critical crises. One was a version of Slade from an alternate reality hunting down Slade's family, and the next was Jericho, who had grown powerful at the cost of his sanity after receiving an upgrade from Lex Luthor. Slade sought help from David, to which his old pal readily agreed. He first helped Slade take down the alternate version of himself, and then David confronted Jericho. Once they both went into space to talk, David used his technology to lock onto the energy signatures that powered Joseph. He created an energy bubble around Jericho, while the diode was latched onto him. Soon it created a massive explosion, and David sacrificed his life to save Joseph and Slade. Jean-Marie, aka Aurora. The character was created by Chris Clement and John Byrne, and introduced in 1979's X-Men issue 120. Jean-Marie Barbier was born in Canada with her twin brother Jean-Paul. While they were infants, their parents died in a car accident, following which Jean-Paul and Jean-Marie grew up separately without any knowledge of each other. Jean-Marie was taken in and raised by a hyper-religious school in Quebec located on the east coast of Canada, known as Madame Dupont's School for Girls. She was raised in a rigorous environment, and the harsh culture drove her to the point of suicide. This was when her mutant powers of flight kicked in. Owing to her religious upbringing at first, she thought it to be a divine gift and told her story to a teacher in school, Sir Anne. She was immediately condemned for blasphemy and severely disciplined. Jean-Marie was unable to cope with the incident and developed dissociative identity disorder, which remained for the rest of her life. She developed 2 personalities, her primary one being a repressed woman, while the second one being a wild extrovert. Both the personalities had no memories of the other one, and since the order was not known to the sisters of Madame Dupont, they punished Jean-Marie inhumanely. Her situation worsened, and her alternate personality kicked in at times of fear, anxiety, or severe stress. At some point, when her alternate personality engaged in a fight with muggers, Wolverine noticed her and asked her to seek James Hudson in Ottawa, who was then forming the Canadian superhero team Alpha Flight. James noticed Jean's similarity with Jean-Paul and contacted both to join the team. Jean-Marie and Jean-Paul reunited and joined Alpha Flight as Aurora and Northstar. The twins could unleash their powers after coming in contact with each other, but Lankowski later performed an experiment that negated the need for the twins to come in contact. Jean-Marie had many adventures with Alpha, where she engaged in numerous romantic relationships. At some point, Alpha Flight came in the way of Loki's schemes, and he wanted revenge by splitting up the team and making them undergo emotional turmoil. He made Northstar and Aurora believe that they were not mutants but half-elves. The two were convinced that their disorders were due to the broken gestalt that separated their powers. so Aurora used her powers to cure Northstar. Jean-Paul was cured of his disease, but Aurora lost her powers. She was next transported to a convent in St. Anne de Beaupré by Loki. Her psyche was healed and she developed a completely different power of light. Jean-Marie rejoined Alpha Flight in order to rescue Jean, who was trapped in Asgard by Loki. Jean's powers reverted and she eventually joined the Gamma Flight. At some point she was taken in by Weapon X, which helped her gain control over her psyche and improve her mental condition. Jean worked for Weapon X for several years. Freight Train. Hailing from the DC Universe, Freight Train is yet another superhero with Canadian citizenship. The character was created by Louise and Tom Morgan and introduced in Adventures of Superman, issue 569, which was released in July 1999. There's not much about his past or even his real name, except that he was a member of the Metropolis Police Department, Metahuman SCU. The Freight Train possessed the power to absorb kinetic energy and store it in his body, which could later be converted to increase his size and strength. He acquired his powers after being exposed to alien parasites. Years later, creators Dan DiDio and Philip Tan revamped the character for the Prime Earth universe. A new version of the character was introduced in Batman Incorporated Volume 2, Issue 1, released in July 2012. The man who became the Freight Train was Eric Moran from Canada. He was a superhero and most notably a member of the covert superhero team known as the Outsiders. Northstar. As mentioned previously, the Beaubier twins got separated after their parents died in a car accident. While the daughter emerged to the superhero Aurora, the son Jean-Paul Beaubier became Northstar. Introduced in X-Men issue 120, young Jean was adopted by a family named Martins. While his twin sister faced her own struggles at the hyper-religious school in Quebec, fate had things different for Jean. History repeated itself for him, as the Martins too died in a car accident when he was 6 years old, following which he was taken into a foster home. He grew up lonely and eventually ended up being caught in several problems. While attempting to steal from the shady man named Raymond Belmonte, Jean fell into the likes of the man, and he eventually helped young Jean understand life and deal with his emerging powers. After leaving the shadows of Raymond, Jean joined the circus in France as an acrobat and later the Front de Libération du Québec, a radical separatist movement in Quebec. However, his association came to an end when he learned about the group's terroristic nature, and he gave into the life of a passionate skier. His skills were remarkable, and he even became a champion at the Olympic Games. His fame brought him to the notice of James Hudson, who recruited both Jean and his twin sister Jean-Marie into his team of Canadian superheroes known as the Alpha Flight. Falling into Loki's trap, the twins were separated, and Jean-Paul was captured in Asgard until Jean-Marie and Alpha Flight managed to rescue him. Sharman. Introduced in 1979's X-Men issue 120 by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, Michael Two Young Men, aka the Sharman, was yet another Canadian superhero from Marvel Comics. Michael was born to the great line of Circe mystics, but discarded the art and instead chose to become a surgeon. He married a girl named Catherine and had a daughter, Elizabeth. Life was normal until Catherine became sick and Michael failed to cure her. Infuriated at her father's failure, she left him and was taken by the McNeils, following which Michael chose to live a life of solitude. He lived in the wilds, where one day he was visited by his grandfather's spirit. Michael finally learned the mystic art and also encountered a goddess who gave him a child, Naria. Sharman and Naria were later recruited to the Alpha Flight by James and Heather. Sharman at some point even assisted Wolverine during his fight against the monstrous Wendigo in northern Canada. His power was so strong that it reverted back the animal into its human form. He later reunited with his long-lost daughter Elizabeth, who also joined Alpha Flight as Talesman. Sharman had numerous adventures, and he was associated with several other popular superheroes. Apart from Alpha Flight, he was also a notable member of the team Gamma Flight. Vindicator. Vindicator was none other than Heather McNeil, who has been previously mentioned to be James's love interest and wife. Introduced in 1980's X-Men issue 139, Heather spent her early life as a neighbor of the Two Young Men family. When Elizabeth detached from her father, and after the death of her mother, she was taken in by Heather's family, as both Heather and Elizabeth grew up like sisters. However, Heather had to work at the young age of 17 to support her big family of 7 other siblings and Elizabeth. She was Jackson's secretary at AM Can Petroleum Company. This is where she met James, and as mentioned before, the two escaped together from the company after learning the motives of the US government to weaponize James's suit. The two got married and eventually aligned with the Canadian government to form the superhero team Alpha Flight. During their honeymoon, the Hudsons met Wolverine, who was in a feral state and calmed down by Heather. Wolverine was asked to join the Alpha Flight, to which he declined and left them as he was developing a bond with Heather. She continued with Alpha Flight, and after the initial disbanding of the team, she secretly conducted the team's fight with Tundra and later Omega Flight, led by Jackson. After the apparent death of James, Heather became the leader of Alpha Flight, and her role was an essential one despite having no powers or prowess over weaponry. It was under her leadership that the Canadian government funded Alpha Flight and offered them a base at Tamarind Island. She also led the team in numerous battles with villains. Later, when James returned, the two switched code names, and while James became the Vindicator, Heather became the Guardian. Puck. Eugene Judd, aka Puck, was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in Canada. He was introduced into John Byrne's Alpha Flight Issue 1, which was released in May 1983. Eugene was born a giant and an outstanding athlete. In 1922, when he was 8, he caught a bear all by himself, which helped his family survive during the harsh winters. He was later shown in Alpha Flight Issue 32, where he became a mercenary after gaining experience with the supernatural. In 1939, when he sought and claimed the Black Blade of Baghdad, the ferocious Black Razor attacked him. The spirit of Black Razor possessed the Black Blade of Baghdad, and it increased his strength but also caused his height to become shorter. Judd eventually began gaining popularity as a mercenary, and he fought numerous battles. After battling the Brass Bishop alongside Black Widow and Modred the Mystic, Judd sought to put down his activities and get in touch with his humanity. He gave up his life as a mercenary and began working at a construction site in Oulu, Ontario. He also volunteered at the Hull House Orphanage. Years later, Judd returned back to his action-filled life and took the name Puck. He joined a team of paranormal mercenaries, and at some point, he was imprisoned for murder. It was James and Heather who bailed him out and recruited him for Alpha Flight. Later, he became one of the members of Gamma Flight. Sasquatch. Introduced in 1979's X-Men issue 120, Dr. Walter Lankowski, aka Sasquatch, was born and raised in the 6th province of Canada, also known as British Columbia. Lankowski was a meritorious student and an excellent footballer. After completing his honors from the University of Calgary, he entered his place at Pennsylvania State University for a degree in physics. During one of his semesters, he met Bruce Banner and later continued his studies on gamma radiation. During the same period, he played for the Green Bay Packers, which gained him great fame and wealth. Lankowski later joined MIT to continue his studies. He was later appointed to McGill University in Montreal, where he studied about the Hulk, knowing that it was none other than Bruce Banner whom he knew. With further funding provided by James Hudson, Lankowski worked in a research facility in the Arctic Circle. While studying Hulk's cause of transformation, he too was exposed to a great amount of gamma radiation, and when he opened a green door to the below place, the entire event turned him into a huge creature. The newly transformed Lankowski went on a rampage until he lost consciousness. When Sharman and Snowbird found him, they helped him gain control over his powers and personality. Calling himself Sasquatch, he joined his training with Gamma and Beta Flight before being recruited into Alpha Flight. He was a part of numerous adventures, most notably the one where Alpha Flight had to find and take down the Hulk. However, things took a turn when Gen Reginald 14 arrived and charged Lankowski with murder during the time he went on a rampage. 14 later reported himself to the Alpha Flight space station and emancipated Gamma Flight. He killed Sasquatch as punishment for his murders. His body was later taken over by Doc Samson's spirit. Being resurrected, Sasquatch warned Gamma Flight about the dealings of the leader. Interestingly, Lankowski's spirit took over Simon's body and went to Baxter Building to aid the Fantastic Four in locating the below place, and used the Forever Gate to retrieve Bruce Banner and Jackie McGee. Later, after the anti-mutation legislations were passed in Canada, Walter worked with Alpha Flight to transport all Canadian mutants to planet Candela. Snowguard. In 2018, creators Jim Zub and Sean Isaacs introduced Amka Aliak, aka Snowguard, in Champions Volume 2, Issue 19, as the newest member of the team. Born in a village on Baffin Island in Nunavut, Canada, named Pangnatong, Amka was an Inuk teenager. The Master of the World had established a facility in the village claiming to stop the ongoing damage to the glaciers owing to global warming. Amka infiltrated the facility in hopes of investigating further about the motives and encountered the Innu spirit Sela, trapped in the containment. When Amka tried to free the spirit, the guards arrived, and in a desperate attempt, when she shoved the drones into the containment, it caused a massive explosion. Amka was wounded, but since Sela was freed, she used her powers to heal him instantly. Sela's energy was imparted to Amka, but she was captured and then used as a source of limitless energy. Later, during the fight between Alpha Flight and the Champions, it was Spider-Man who rescued her together with the two teams. Master of the World was taken down. Since then, Amka has become one of the members of the Champions. However, when the government banned the participation of superheroes under the age of 21, Amka was apprehended by the Cradle. Equinox. Mia Bin Martin, aka the Equinox, was a Canadian superhero from the DC Universe. The character was created by Jeff Lemire and Mike McKone and introduced in 2014's Justice League United Issue 0. She was a Medeo guided by the seven spirits of Kree life, with the power of love, humility, bravery, truth, respect, wisdom, and honesty. The Medeos were the defenders against the Witigo, the spirits of the drowned or starved to death. The Witigos were the embodiment of the seven dark pillars, namely control, deception, greed, domination, fear, aggression, and selfishness. Maya Bin's story began at the age of 16, as she was returning from school with her friends in Moose Factory Island. Although her friends tried initiating a conversation, she was engrossed in her own thoughts. When she returned home, she fought a man waiting for her. The man frantically stated that Witigo was coming, and she had to say the word Kiwatan. The man soon transformed into a beast, and asked to say the word and transform as well. Soon there was a blast of light, and she realized that it was a dream, and her grandmother was comforting her. Sometime later, there were the former members of the Justice League battling an alien near her hometown. Mayabin and her friend Heather discovered an alien base, and the alien was Witigo. The alien creature soon trapped Mayabin in a cave and taunted her to say the word and transform. Heather managed to escape and sought help from a spatially displaced Alana Lewis. The two searched for Mayabin, but unbeknownst to them, Witigo was stalking them. When they found Mayabin, the creature attacked. Mayabin finally said the word and transformed into a beast. She easily destroyed Witigo, and after returning home to her grandmother, she learned about her origins. With the knowledge of her heritage, she went back into the cave to face Witigo, which highly impressed Alana, who took her to the Justice League. Snowbird. Naria was born to the goddess of the Northern Lights, Nailana, with the midwifery assistant of Michael Two Young Men, or the Sharman. Back in ancient times, where Inuit gods of the north fought against the great beasts to save Earth, in the end, both were exiled from the planet, and the Inuit gods sought to create an agent to protect Earth from further invasion of the great beasts. Naria was the agent, and after Sharman brought the infant to the land of Canada, she assumed a human form. Interestingly, her powers were diminished when she left Canada. Sharman and Naria were both recruited to Alpha Flight at the same time, and she took the name Snowbird. Naria eventually became the Inuit god agent on Earth, and she and her teammates were a barrier for the great beast. At some point, Naria fell in love with Doug Thompson and got married. She eventually became pregnant, which outraged the Inuit gods to the extent of banning her from their realm. When Naria went to the Arctic along with Doug and Sharman to give birth to the baby, the spell accidentally awakened dormant pestilence. The newborn was soon possessed by evil pestilence to menace Earth with the powers of death and decay. A battle soon emerged against pestilence, which ended in death of Doug and the newborn. Pestilence then possessed Snowbird, and so, when Vindicator arrived, she was killed. The souls of Doug, Naria, and the newborn were welcomed by the gods in their realm. Marvelous verdict. So we have finally come to the end of our video, and we hope you have liked it. Let us know in the comments section which of the superheroes you think would best represent Canada. Let's not forget the upcoming movie with the two favorite Canadian Marvel characters, Deadpool and Wolverine, which may set new standards for the characters. Thank you for watching this video till the end, and stay tuned for the next marvelous video.